Robin McGhee-Whitmore. I was born in Maryville, Tennessee. I grew up in Alcoa, Tennessee, which is right off of Maryville, Tennessee.
And what school did you go to there?
I attended Alcoa school system from elementary all the way up to high school. I was part of the group who were the first black children to go into Alcoa Elementary from the Hall Elementary School that was right up the street in Alcoa. We merged with Alcoa Elementary when I was in the 6th grade. And that was when they first built Alcoa Elementary. And I was amazed that it was round. The school was round and all the classrooms were around the circle. And that just amazed me. And I was in the 6th grade, and that was the first time we actually had school with white children.
What year was that?
I was born in 1960, and I was in the 6th grade. 73, 74, 73 probably, 72, 73. My parents taught us from an early age not to distinguish between black and white or any other nationality for that matter. And so I had no issue with desegregation. Actually, I was kind of fascinated to be around other kids and, learn their culture and the ways that we're different. So I immediately made a lot of friends and kept them all the way up through school. I was in Alcoa then at the time, and Alcoa was predominantly black. The city of Alcoa was created for aluminum company workers. And my father came up from Von Orr and was one of those workers, and that's how he got in Alcoa. And so it really was a community of aluminum company workers in small houses that they had provided for them. So it was predominantly black. Of course, now when I ride through there's people of all colors that live in Alcoa. It's really amazing.
Did you attend any baseball or any sports events?
Yeah, Alcoa Tornadoes. Yeah, football games, and I was in the band. I was a flag girl, and then I was a rifle girl for a few years, and so yeah, I attended most of the football games during my high school year.
What was your biggest sports rival?
Maryville. Yeah, we had trouble beating them. But I think now we're doing pretty good. I don't keep up with it as much, and gosh, I need to go back to a game. I haven't been to a game in 20, 30 years probably. My father, Robin McGhee, was a pastor here at Foster Chapel. He became a pastor in 1957, and I was born in 1960, so I was born in this church and grew up in this church. So yes, I attended church all my life.
So you attended church here at Foster?
I did, yeah.
So you all drove all the way from Alcoa out to here?
Yes, we did, for 48 years.
How many days a week did you all go?
Sundays, of course, and then Wednesdays. But then we had 2 annual revivals, so every day during annual revival we drove out here. And on Sundays, if we had an afternoon service or had a 6 o'clock service, we didn't go home. One of the families here would invite us over for dinner, and we would just stay at their house so my dad wouldn't have to drive, the 29 miles back to Maryville. We knew a lot of the members. We were very active up at the Oakland Center. So we did a lot of things up there. When my father first came to pastor here, they were only having services on the 1st and 3rd Sundays. And the other 2 Sundays, they would go up the street to the AME Zion Church up at the top of the street. They went up there and worshiped on the 2nd and 4th Sundays. And so our churches did that for years until Foster Chapel began to grow, and my father decided to have services every Sunday. Okay, my father's name was Robert Nelson McGhee. He was from Vonore, Tennessee. My mother's name is Betty Ruth Lenore, and she was from Lenore City, and met my father through his sister at a church event, actually in Alcoa, and they just became sweethearts at an early age and got married pretty early. She was, I think, 18 or 19, and my dad was like in his early 20s. My dad worked at the Alcoa Aluminum Company. He was drafted to the military and served there for 4 years.
What year was that?
That was in, let's see, he was born in 25. And if he was 18, I don't know which year that is, but he was in World War II, served overseas there, and he came back. They corresponded by mail because they had met each other. And so when he came back, he worked for the Alcoa Aluminum Company. And they moved him from Vonore to Alcoa, gave him a house. And each house had a garden where the aluminum company workers could grow their own crops. And I can remember helping my dad in the garden as I was growing up. And he kept that garden for years and years till he got up in age. But my mom was from Lenore City, and she met my dad, and she was young when they married. And I got tickled because she told me when he went to work, she would be home playing with dolls. That's how young she was. And but they were married for 63 years. Well, my dad was the pastor here, and so he didn't have a lot of time for extra things, but on Sundays, a lot of time after church, we would grab a bucket of chicken and go up to the mountains and what we called the Loop. I don't know if it's still called that, but we'd drive around the Loop and go to Sugar Land. And we loved Sugar Land, and we'd walk through and look at the cabins and the old mill and stuff like that. And we'd eat our bucket of chicken and come home. And we did go fishing from time to time. My dad loved to fish, and so the whole family would go fishing. And then other than church, I mean, I grew up in church, and it seemed like we were here a lot of the time. My mother's passed away 4 years ago, and my dad passed away 2 years ago. There's a mausoleum off Alcoa Highway, Sherwood, and that's where they are. They're in that mausoleum. So I'll go tomorrow and put flowers on for Mother's Day. So I did not know my grandparents. Now, I was about 4. I think my grandmother, both my maternal and paternal grandmothers were passed. My paternal grandfather was still alive when I was born, but he died when I was 3 or 4. So I don't remember a lot about him.
Do you remember their names?
He was Robert Nelson McGhee, but oddly enough, my father wasn't a junior. They named him after my father, but he wasn't a junior. Legally, officially, he wasn't, but he was Robert Nelson McGhee. And my father talked about him growing up, and how my father was very proud. He told me a story about one time their house caught on fire, and they lost everything. And the man who owned or sharecropped out that house to my grandfather offered him another house to live in, but he would not take that house. He built them a shed with a tin roof, and they stayed in that shed for about 6 months while he built a new house. And my dad said that was some of the hardest times when he was growing up, was living in that shed. My grandmother, Molly McGhee, my father said that she didn't cook real well, but that they learned to enjoy her cooking. And I do remember him talking about her mother, who was half Cherokee Indian. And they said she couldn't cook at all. that they'd go over there and they'd just go home hungry because they just wouldn't hardly eat what she cooked. She never really learned how to cook regular country style. So she still cooked a lot of Indian dishes, I guess. And so they didn't enjoy her cooking. And I remember my dad telling me that. My grandparents, I don't know anything about my grandparents on my mother's side. I know that my mother's father sold moonshine out of the house. And my mom talked about growing up with people coming in and out of the house all the time and how she hated that. And I think as a result of that, she enjoyed company, but she enjoyed a quiet house. She didn't like a lot of hollering and a lot of loud music and stuff like that. I think that was because she had so much activity as a girl, growing up with people in and out and, that kind of thing. Well, my mother's grandparents were from Lenore City. They were sharecroppers there, and I assume their parents were slaves, but I never really pulled that side. And I did do a lot of ancestry research on my dad's side, and they were all from the Von Orr, Madisonville region. And an interesting fact that I learned at the Nashville Library of Research was that my father's great-grandfather was the son of J.W. Niles, who Niles Ferry is named after. He came from England. It was a white man who came from England and married Margaret Humes, which was John McGee's daughter. And they had Texas McGee, who was my father's great-great-great-grandfather. So Texas was half black, half white. And his white family did claim him. And he's buried in the McGee Cemetery there. It's down in Von Orr. My dad said you can't hardly get up in there anymore. I think he took us one time and we scraped the graves with paper to get the imprints. My sister has a lot of that stuff, but you can't get back up in there. But they did claim Texas as his son, as J.W. Niles' son.
This area is Oakland, right?
Oakland.
Did you spend a lot of time in this area?
I did on church days. And from time to time, I would spend the night with a friend or so, or they would come to Maryville and spend the night with me, or Alcoa at that time. I was 16 when we moved to Maryville, and although I was still at the church, I think I had kind of outgrown the spending the night phase at that time. But when I was a young girl, I'd come and spend the night. We knew all our neighbors here, and most of them attended church. My dad visited them from time to time, and I would go with him. We also ate at most everybody's house here in Oakland on those Sundays when we'd have to stay over, or even Sundays when we didn't. Sometimes we'd just go over there to eat because they'd invite us. And so we spent a lot of time in the homes here, yes.
Can you tell me anything about what life was like out here around then?
In Oakland?
Mm-hmm.
Very free, very open, and kids just running up and down the street. And it was nothing for me to walk from the church down the street or up behind on Acorn Drive. We did it all the time. I actually found a path from the back of the church to Acorn, and we used to just go down the path. And my mama would never told my mama that because I didn't think she'd let me go because it was very wooded back behind the church. And so when we'd leave, I'd say, I'm going to go around the Acorn to the Hall's house. And she said, be careful. And going down the street, and I wouldn't even go down the street. I'd go behind the church and go through the path and be right by the Hall's house. And so that was kind of a secret that I think the kids had that some of the adults didn't know about. But yeah, we spent a lot of time here. I love the cemetery behind the house. There's a cemetery across the street, the Hall Cemetery. The Jordan Cemetery is what I think it's called. And it's grown up a lot. So I think it's kind of hard to get to unless it's changed since I've been out this way. I didn't attend a lot of social activities here. Of course, we had things at the church, and the youth had activities here. We would have, I can remember by the time I was 10 or 11, the church no longer celebrated Halloween. We never had Halloween parties or anything like that. We changed them to Hallelujah parties. So he would invite kids to come into the church and have candy and games, and they could dress like characters, but they had to be either funny cartoon characters or biblical characters, no witches or goblins or things like that. And so that stuck with me growing up, and so my kids really have never been trick-or-treating. We just didn't do trick-or-treating.
Well, since we're talking about that, can you tell me a little bit about like holidays? What holidays really had an impact on you?
Oh, wow. I just remember holidays at the church, Mother's Day. All the mothers would come, and I was thinking about that today, about me going to church tomorrow, that I need to get a white carnation. Because the mothers who had lost their mothers would wear white carnations, and the mothers whose mothers were still, or the women whose mothers were still alive, would wear red carnations. And even as a child, you know, I about 10, I wore a red carnation on my dress on Mother's Day, and it was just nice to see all the women come in with their carnations. And it's Mother's Day, and I thought about that because it is tomorrow. But Christmas, I remember they would put a Christmas tree downstairs, and all the members would bring gifts for each other, or we would exchange names in Sunday school. And we'd gather together that Sunday before Christmas downstairs and have cookies and tea. And James Chesney, who our fellowship hall down here is named after, would call out names. He was the superintendent of Sunday school, and he'd call out all the names, and it would take an hour or more to call out all the names and people get their gifts, but it was a really, really happy time for the church, yeah. Christmas, of course, especially as a young girl, I enjoyed church, but Christmas, Thanksgiving, you know, was really good here. We generally celebrated, did something for Thanksgiving here. Gave out bags or for the needy and did things like that. So we did do some community outreach and give food away to those who needed it and that kind of thing. Other than here at the church, no, like youth groups. My father started a Boy Scout troop here in the church, and it was very active and had a lot of young men in it, and a lot of, I think we had like 7 Eagle Scouts that came from this church, this Boy Scout troop, and of course it dissolved eventually, but
do you remember what years that was?
So I was probably in my early 20s, so around 1980, 80 to 85 probably.
That's when it was starting up, or?
Yes, and then the Boy Scouts eventually started meeting up at the Oakland Center, and they met up there for many, many years, and my son was a Boy Scout. We went on camping trips, and they did a lot of things with the boys, and I think it really nurtured them. And to have 5 Eagle Scouts is really great, to me, contribution. I know that my father is already a legacy here at Foster Chapel. He was the 6th pastor here, and he was here for 48 years. And the church grew a lot around my father, so it was one building structure when he came. And he talked about it having 30 members when he came. And when he retired after 48 years, 2005 actually, is when he retired. We had about 150 members, and which was a pretty good number for a Baptist church, a Black Baptist church here in Knoxville. and it was thriving. It was doing really well, and my father was proud of that. And he remained a member here at Foster Chapel even after he retired. He became a member and stayed until till he passed away. He passed away in 2019. Just, I thought about when I was coming here, I thought about the many times we went to members' houses and all the different, how different they were. I can remember some families being very fancy, and they had this idea that when the preacher comes, you use your china, and you have 2 forks and 2 spoons and 2. I remember Sister Johnny Johnson doing that, and us trying to figure out what each fork was for, and her teaching us that as children. Her house to us was so big. It was on this street. It's still there. Of course, she's not there. But as a child, I thought that house was so big to me, and that she was rich. And I remember that, and just going to other members' houses, and time here at the church with my parents, my mom and my dad. I think they became pillars of the community. And a lot of people looked up to them and really respected them. And my father was well respected by most, I'd say all of the pastors who knew him here in Knoxville, Tennessee. And so I'm really proud of the legacy that they've left behind, and just how they touched Foster Chapel and made it part of what it is today. I want to thank Sister Harris and Pastor Talbot for allowing me to speak about my experiences at Foster Chapel, and it did have a huge impact on my life, and just being around those members of the church, the older members, and really kind of shaped who I am today. So.